Alrighty, we are live with Anxiety and Athletes. Happy Wednesday, hump day. We have some really great guests today. I'm really excited to have Rachel McMahon and Annie Crispin with me. We will get started just by saying that the live stream is intended to serve as educational content and not intended to replace therapy. Although we will be talking about accessing treatment for mental health, for treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or if you ever are feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or call a suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255. We also just want to say that I want this to be a really safe space for everybody. Be kind, respect everyone. I love how much our community comes together during the live streams. I know we really feed off of that. But with that, just keep in mind that this is a broadcast on various social media platforms and is being recorded. So please be mindful that if you do ask a personal question or leave comments, it will be there. So without further ado, we're going to get started here. I'm really excited about this topic. This is a topic that has been something that's been brewing for a while and I think is not talked about enough, honestly. We're going to talk about kind of athletes in the college world, in the professional world, high school level, whatever it is, understanding that there needs to be ways for athletes to access proper mental health treatment. I know for myself personally, it took me a while to find treatment, and it actually takes, the average person with OCD 10 years to actually get treated for OCD and diagnosed. So it really does take a village, and it really shows that we have come a far way, but we have a long ways to go. So I want to make sure that, we're talking about things that everybody wants to talk about. So feel free, leave comments, questions, and we'll get to you. All right. So, Rachel, Annie, thanks so much for coming on.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Tom.
Why don't each of you just kind of go into your background individually, and then we can kind of come back and talk about what you guys are doing with your organization.
Awesome. That sounds great. I'll jump in and then let Annie go. So I'll give a little bit of kind of my personal background, athletic, mental health. So I've been a lifelong athlete. I grew up running track and field, playing volleyball. Volleyball was kind of my main sport. I played club and varsity through high school and was hoping to play in college, but ended up going for the track and field route. So I ended up being a long jumper at Brown University. And then kind of alongside my sort of athletic career, I dealt with some mental health challenges from an early age. So anxiety and depression mainly from kind of middle school onward. And so I really developed kind of a twin passion for both athletics and mental health. And for me, sports was really a space of kind of coping and healing. And I wanted to kind of continue on that for me and help others that I knew kind of realize that connection between sort of athletics and healing. And so at Brown, was on the women's track and field team, absolutely loved it. And in my senior year, I was lucky enough to be one of the captains of the team. And in that capacity, started to kind of recognize in some of my teammates some of the challenges that I was experiencing, and realized how closely linked some of the mental health challenges they were experiencing were to kind of their athletic identities. So ranging from kind of performance anxiety to eating disorders, the nature of the challenges they were going through was really connected to competition and norms within the sport, and kind of the reasons they weren't talking about it were also really connected to the athlete identity, which I'm sure we'll kind of talk about a little bit more later.
Right.
Yeah, but so kind of realizing that in myself and in my teammates sort of led me to start thinking about how to kind of fix that gap in care. And we'll talk more about the platform that we're working on, but I'll let kind of Annie give her intro, and then we can talk about how kind of athletics and mental health experiences led to the platform that we've created.
Sweet. Yeah. So I'm Annie. I was a competitive gymnast growing up. So I first set foot in the gym when I was 2 in a mommy and me class, and I fell in love right away. My mom tried to introduce me to other sports. I played lacrosse for a little bit, but really gymnastics was my one true love. And I started competing when I was 6, which was as early as you could. And really kind of fell in love with the sport, found a lot of passion and joy in it. It wasn't really until I was in high school when I started to notice how mental health was playing a role in my athletic experience. Although in hindsight, I can see now that it really played a larger role in my life and in my athletic experience kind of earlier on too. But in high school, I was really struggling with an eating disorder and definitely felt a lot of stigma around speaking up about what was going on. And this is kind of where finding support came into play. I had no idea where to find support. I think I knew something was going on. My parents and coaches knew something was going on, but they didn't quite know how to best support me in terms of like who to find or where to go and all of that. So that sort of played a huge role in kind of my experience as an athlete. I went on to compete at Brown for my freshman and sophomore year. And again, kind of noticed, as Rachel had mentioned, a lot of the other athletes on the team also kind of speaking to their struggles and not knowing also how to best support them. So that became another interest. I ended up double majoring in English and psychology. And my senior year, I wrote my honors thesis on the intersection of competitive athletics and mental health. So this was a really great way to kind of reflect on my own personal experiences and then also research more into the field. So a lot of professional athletes had been kind of speaking up about their experiences, which was great. And I found a lot of kind of healing in reading their stories and writing about my own. But again, noticed that next sort of action step of where do athletes go, though, when they're actually looking for support was kind of missing. So that's sort of where, as Rachel had mentioned, what we're working on kind of came into play. But yeah, that's a bit about my background, and yeah, happy to kind of talk to the platform more a bit too.
That's amazing. And, one thing I just thought of is that you both went to Brown, and, my mom always used to say is like, if you are the smartest person in the room, find another room. And it seems that I found the room where, I am definitely not the smartest person in the room. So this is perfect. I'll learn a lot from you guys. But seriously, I think what you two are both doing, let's kind of dive into what it is and what we're going to talk about with treatment and how you guys are operating the organization that you're running.
Cool. Awesome. I can give kind of a quick overview of the platform. So it's called Galea Health. Cool. So it's, Galea Health, GALEA Health. And it's a mental health and performance platform that connects athletes with licensed therapists who have direct experience in athletics or were kind of high-level competitive athletes themselves. And it really kind of spoke to that kind of gap that both Annie and I mentioned of feeling like we didn't know where to turn for support. And oftentimes when we did seek support, it was from providers who didn't quite understand the athlete experience and didn't understand how kind of norms within competition and within sport were sort of shaping our experience of depression or anxiety or eating disorders. And so basically what we've done is kind of gone out and found hundreds of providers who have direct experience in athletics who are really passionate about working with athletes. And the providers kind of span a range of sort of mental health challenges, from kind of clinical mental health to sort of wellness and performance to really that kind of peak performance sports psychology side of things. So we wanted to kind of help the full spectrum of kind of athlete mental health and performance.
That's amazing. I think, one thing that I really like about the system and how you organize it is that these therapists and these treatment providers that you are putting your athletes in touch with have direct experience with athletics and have been a prior competitor in an athletic event or sport. I think that really goes a long way because you're able to connect to so much more. I know for myself, like there's somebody that has shared an experience like that is really helpful. I think that part is really, really intriguing to me.
Totally. Yeah. And one thing we've kind of noticed too, and even research kind of backs this up, is that therapeutic relationship is the biggest predictor of a successful therapy outcome. So having either that shared experience or some sort of connection, especially on that first time you're meeting with someone, is super important. It can help build that therapeutic relationship so that you really can have the chance to work through whatever you're kind of going through and have success kind of in that way. So, yeah.
Right. So can anybody sign up for this?
Yeah, so we do kind of, have a rigorous vetting process for our providers, depending on what type of providers they are. But we have a directory of therapists kind of in a bunch of different states. We have 5 main states right now where we have a higher concentration of therapists, but we're working hard to kind of be fully nationwide. So anyone who's kind of looking for support can head to Galea and kind of browse for a provider based on criteria that they have. And we also have a kind of matching service. So if athletes don't want to look through the full directory or aren't quite sure what they're looking for, they can take a kind of tailored survey that asks different questions about kind of how your mental health is doing and what challenges you might be experiencing. And then we'll match them with 3 providers who kind of meet their criteria.
That's awesome. I think, one thing that I see people struggle with is finding the right provider. And I know for myself, when I was at rock bottom, my mom practically begged the therapist that I'm currently with still. I've been with her for 7 years now. But before that, I had gone through 2 or 3 that said they treated OCD, but didn't actually treat OCD, right? Obviously, I'm the only one out of us that has OCD, but this is, a specific type of therapy, ERP. And to say you treat OCD and then you don't actually treat it was misleading. So now what I love about what you're doing is that you're providing things for the athletes that are directly what they need. And I think what I always ran into trouble with was finding the actual right fit for a therapist, because that's half the battle with therapy. Even wanting to be motivated to do therapy is going to the office or virtually, being motivated and connecting with the actual person is half the battle.
Totally. And we try to kind of embed that sort of vetting in our sort of interview process with providers. Definitely for OCD, we explicitly ask, are you trained in ERP, and is that a kind of method that you would use? And if they're not, then we wouldn't kind of have them check the specialty box that they have kind of experience in OCD. But I think it's really a big challenge kind of finding someone to connect with. And I think there's this kind of misconception that therapy is all one thing, and you're going to go and talk to someone about, how your parents have shaped your childhood or something like that. And that can totally be part of therapy and can be profoundly helpful for a lot of people. But there's so many different types of therapy. There's CBT, which is a little bit more kind of action oriented in some ways and a little bit less kind of existential. And there's just a lot of different options. And I think one thing that I wish I knew when I was kind of starting my therapy journey is I can kind of, it might be a long haul, but I can do what I need to do to find someone I really connect with and who uses a method that works for me.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely true. The fact that there are different types of therapy. I know when I was going through intensive treatment, people would always look at me like, well, doesn't it help you? Don't you feel so good after therapy? It's like, no, I literally was just I was just facing the exact intrusive thought that has debilitated me for the past 3 weeks. No, it didn't feel good. You know what I mean? So I think there's in general, definitely, as you said, a very large misconception on what therapy is and what it can be and what it's not. And I think, it can kind of be whatever the person wants it to be, right? It's kind of, it's their time that they're putting in. But with OCD, obviously, there is that specific type of therapy. And with certain mental disorders, there's certain things that are more effective. So it's important to make sure we're connecting people with the right treatment provider, which it seems like having a vetting process is so crucial. It's almost like a dating profile, having that those check marks to make sure that you're giving them the best chance to connect with somebody that's right for them.
Yeah. I'm curious, Tom, how did you, because I've talked to so many people who kind of tried therapy and really hated it or didn't connect with their provider and then kind of gave up on it, which I totally understand. I'm curious how you kind of managed to stick with it through multiple providers and what that process was like for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I started going to therapy. I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 16. I was sophomore in high school, but I had chronic depression and generalized anxiety for a while before that. So I had gone to therapy as a kid, a little like middle school age, as a preteen, and kind of understood what it was, but wasn't really getting anything out of it because the underlying issue was that it really was OCD, and I just hadn't been triggered enough, or it hadn't really come out yet. It really came out my freshman year and sophomore year, and that's when it really took over my life. And I think what really kept me motivated was having support around me and having them sit in on a session of ERP or coming in after the session so they understood what I was doing in therapy, instead of like me being irritable after therapy. Because I know for myself, I was always extremely irritable after therapy because I had just fought so much anxiety for an hour straight. And with OCD, right, I always say it's that the obsession causes that, that spike of anxiety, and you want that immediate relief, and that's what the compulsion kind of gives you. It gives you that immediate relief, but as soon as you do the compulsion, it spikes back up, and it's just a slope, right? Up and down, up and down. And with ERP, exposure response therapy, we go all the way up, and we feel that intense anxiety that can be so debilitating and so excruciating. But then you learn to sit with it over time, and it declines over time. It could take hours, it could take minutes for some, it could take the whole night after therapy. And so I would come home, and I was so irritable, and I'd give a lot of props to my family because I can't imagine the strain to put on them. Obviously, like, they didn't understand what ERP was. I was just understanding what ERP was. So to expect them to understand it was not wrong of me, because I didn't know better either. But look, hindsight's always 20/20. But they definitely gave me enough support, more than enough support to keep me motivated. And they did that by kind of sitting in on what ERP was. And I was not fortunate, but I was fortunate in the way that a lot of my obsessions actually were based around my family dying in a car crash, or me losing control in the kitchen with like a knife and hurting somebody or in my family. So they actually had to be a part of my exposures. So they really got a good feel of what ERP was. And so I think that definitely, but even if it's the athlete is not doing, or the patient is not doing ERP, if it's just talk therapy, even just having their family members or one of their loved ones that they're always around come in after a session to kind of, understand what's going on. I think that showed me that they supported what I was doing.
Yeah, I think that's something that Annie and I have talked a lot about too, is just trying to think about kind of therapy and the healing process as not a totally individual process, but how do we bring in teammates, coaches, parents to the process? Obviously, some of it's personal and a lot of it is private, but there's such an amazing support role that parents and coaches and teammates can play. Absolutely. And that's amazing that you had that. Did it kind of sort of start from the beginning of sort of having a full family approach, or did that kind of evolve over time?
I think it kind of evolved over time after they saw how much, because when I walked into therapy, it wasn't like I was getting immediately better, even with the ERP. It kind of got worse. It kind of escalated and then started getting better. So I think that once they saw how debilitating it was, and how excruciating it was to fight that anxiety in session, and then have to go home and do more exposure homework, they wanted to help me. And, I realized that I'm definitely very blessed and fortunate to have that support system that not everybody has. And that's why I think it's so important that we talk about, treatment with coaches, with teammates, with, obviously I just think that one thing that I neglected was opening up to, the basketball team, or opening up to other people early on, because of the shame and the guilt of having a mental disorder, especially in the high school age. It's like, once that's unleashed, like, you're that kid with the mental disorder, you know what I mean? So it was like, for me, because there's such a stigma, it was like immediately, okay, that's the kid with the mental disorder. So we need to, but obviously what we all are trying to do is get rid of that stigma where mental health is a free-flowing conversation and a very well understood conversation and a well thought of conversation.
Yeah. One thing.
Sorry, I was just to see your guys' experiences, obviously, with opening up and seeking treatment, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, one thing you that just kind of popped up for me was how surprised and thankful I was that when I did start to speak to teammates about kind of how I was feeling, and this doesn't have to go to the extreme of being completely depressed or very anxious. Like there's a range of feelings in between that people can relate to. So when I did open up to people, one, I was surprised at how many people were kind of feeling those extremes and could relate and really lend a hand in finding support and making sure and checking in and all of those things. But also knowing that like if you're feeling down or you're feeling stressed or something, that's also something someone can relate to. So there's really kind of that spectrum of like emotional distress that people know what it feels like and can empathize with you kind of regardless. It is different when someone knows exactly kind of what you've been through, or especially with something severe like OCD or an eating disorder, and you're like, yes, it's exactly that, like that thought, you get it. And yeah, I was surprised kind of how prevalent it is sort of in the athlete community, and how much it isn't talked about. And like you said, hopefully we're changing that conversation. But I do think it's kind of helpful to realize when you are talking to people that they probably have an idea, and they will probably be able to understand kind of more than you initially think they would.
That's a good point. I do think even myself, I don't think I gave people the benefit of the doubt enough, because I think also the reason I didn't was because a lot of times when I said I had OCD, it was like, oh, so you're really clean. And obviously with OCD, there's a lot of misconceptions, just like every other mental disorder. But with OCD especially, there's a lot of stigma around what it really is. And I think being thrown into, oh, he's just a neat freak or he hates germs, when really, I was debilitated 12 to 14 hours a day of compulsions, 10 hours to actually live a life that to me wasn't worth living anymore. So to me, like, I think that's part of the reason I wasn't able to give people the benefit of the doubt to understand.
Totally.
Yeah. And I guess one thing that I would sort of recommend to someone that does have a friend or someone in their family, say to them, oh, I'm experiencing this mental health challenge, or I'm experiencing OCD or depression. We have all these ideas about kind of what those terms mean. But even if you think you know exactly what it means, you can ask, oh, what's that like for you? Like, what is your experience of OCD like? It's not the same for everyone, even if we have the definitions perfect in our mind. It manifests in so many different ways. And I think part of the challenge with sort of support seeking and kind of having more of a family or community approach is that people don't want to say the wrong thing. It's not always that they're, don't respect it or that it's kind of the stigma, but they're just like, oh, I don't want to say anything wrong. When most of the times you can just kind of ask an open-ended question of like, oh, what's that like? Or how can I support you? Or I think sometimes too, the conversation stops at, oh, you should go see a therapist, or I'm seeing a therapist. And then people are like, nice, that's amazing. But you can still ask, like, how's therapy been going? Like, how was it? Some of my friends and Annie and I talk about this all the time, in part because we're working on a mental health platform. But some of my closest friends, they know I have therapy at a specific time on Wednesdays. And sometimes they'll text me and be like, hey, how's your therapy going? And I don't usually give them all the details, but it's meaningful and nice to kind of keep the conversation going and just have it feel like open and comfortable, and that it's okay if they say something wrong. Nothing's really wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. I think, part of that is just keeping the conversation going with mental health and athletics. I think the more we talk about it, the more people realize that you don't have to know everything about everything. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like people just feel like if they say something wrong, then it's going to be taken the wrong way, and they're better off just keeping quiet and looking away. It's like the innocent ignorance, and keeping that innocent ignorance of not wanting to learn about it. But I think, I know for myself, for someone asking me what it's like, using an open-ended question, not assuming something, would actually make me feel so much more cared about and more connected to the person that I'm talking to. And I mean, even like, what's the worst that happens if someone asks that? Sorry, I don't really feel like explaining it. Okay, like, no worries. So it's like, I feel people are worried about being nosy, but it's really not being nosy. It's trying to learn from a source that is direct and deals with it every day.
Yeah, and I think sometimes too, even if I'm not in the mood to talk about something, I still appreciate the question. And at some point, maybe I will be sort of ready to talk about it. And I've definitely, had some friends that have been really persistent in a way that hasn't been kind of pressury or sort of nosy, but just really meaningful. And then eventually I just always knew the space to talk about it was there. So yeah, I would always encourage people to just ask. And if you ask in an open and kind of non-judgmental way, at the worst, people will say, "Ugh, I'm not really in the mood to talk about it right now."
Right. And do you have anything to add about opening up and talking about therapy with others?
I think, yeah, kind of what both of you're saying makes a lot of sense, kind of in my personal experiences too. Yeah, I think it can be. I think one thing, just kind of to echo both what you're saying, it can be kind of a beautiful way to connect with someone. So with some of my friends, it really has opened up a lot of conversation and kind of an avenue for trust that wasn't there before. So yeah, I just think that, like, again, you don't need to be kind of nosy, and you don't have to, like, if someone really doesn't want to talk about it, that's totally fine. But I've kind of seen the side of it where it's opened up kind of a line of communication and amount of trust that is really nice. And I know that, like, knowing that you know someone either who's going through therapy or you're on the other side, and you can just kind of talk to someone else about it is really helpful too, because a lot of it is kind of about what you're applying, kind of what you're talking about in therapy in your outside life. So I found that, like, if you have someone who's kind of that in between or intermediary between, like, how you're actually living in life and what you're talking about in therapy, kind of makes it feel a little bit more real, if that makes sense. So
yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think I found that to be pretty helpful as well.
I think also what's interesting is that if you what could be also helpful is that when someone asks about therapy, we don't know what the other person that's asking is going through personally. They could be asking about what's it like, what therapy's like, or what it's like to live with OCD or anxiety or depression, because they're trying to figure out what's going on with themselves.
Right.
And I think that's definitely a way for us to, have people seek out treatment, is for us to answer those questions, so that, because we don't know what's going on, just like they couldn't see it until we were open about it, right? I think a lot of times, I know I've had people ask me about therapy, and then, I get a call or text, a month later, and they're like, "Hey, so I started therapy," and I'm like, "Oh."
Yeah.
And you just don't know, like, what that person is going through. So I think answering those questions is not only beneficial to us and to breaking down the mental health stigma in athletics and even outside of athletics, but also it could be helpful to that person that's asking.
That's such a good point. Yeah, a lot of it is kind of not crowdsourcing, but yeah, people are curious about it for themselves, or maybe if it's not for themselves, they're thinking, "Oh, maybe my sibling would really benefit from this," or
Right.
Maybe my sibling is dealing with this challenge. I think that's a great point. I think one other thing I would add too is, because I think I'm someone that tends to overthink conversations before I have them.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure whether or not to ask a friend what they're going through or how their therapy process is, you can say, "Hey, do you want me to ask about this? Because I can also just not."
Right.
And then if they say, "Yeah, I don't want to talk about it," then you don't have to talk about it. But I think normally we build things up a bit more in our minds than, like, usually I stress about conversations, and they're much more stressful in my mind than they are when I'm actually talking to the person about something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know for me, my boss is really understanding. My new boss at Wagner is really understanding about, I go to therapy on Wednesdays at 4, and the other day he wanted me to do a task, and he remembered that, you know, we had talked about at 4 p.m. that on Wednesday that I go to therapy. He said, "Don't worry about it." So like, just like having that understanding of, you know, I don't know whether it's a generational thing. He's a younger guy. Maybe he understands it a little bit more. But I think a lot of times having leadership that from the top down really can understand it, can help kind of push the envelope of connecting people with treatment and understanding mental health is a real thing in athletics, especially.
Yeah, totally. And I think one thing too, we've talked to kind of talk about the sort of sports angle a little bit more. We've talked a lot about kind of how much sort of pride we take in, and I don't want to speak for you, Annie, but I think this holds true, where we feel very proud of kind of the athlete identity and feel like we got a lot of grit and toughness and resilience from being athletes, and that's also part of the challenge when it comes to talking openly about mental health and talking about vulnerability. Is a kind of core part of my identity is like, oh, I'm going to work through the pain and that type of thing. Right. So I think especially in the athlete community, I don't know if you found that. I mean, Annie and Tom, you can both kind of speak to it. But
yeah, absolutely. I think for me, especially as a strength coach, you know, I try working with so many different athletes. You know, I try not to make it, you know, I want to build the standard of excellence that we want to strive for. But I also want them to know that they're going to come up short sometimes, and that like you don't need to just push through every single thing, that because long term that's not going to help us grow as human beings or as athletes. You know, so I want to make sure that they're in a space where they're pushing themselves, but also know that they have support too. But I think it is true about the identity piece is huge, especially for athletes that, you know, eventually the ball stops bouncing or the cleats get hung up, whatever it is, you know, for most after the college level, right? Let's be honest. I hope everybody that's pursuing professional athletics, it gets there, but it is few and far in between. That's, you know, it's the cream of the crop. It's the top level. So when our whole lives have been an athlete and sink into that identity, then all of a sudden, after 4 years of college, your senior year, it's over. You know, I think a lot of times people struggle with, okay, so who am I now?
Totally. The who am I now question was huge for me, especially because I chose to leave the sport after my sophomore year in college, and I never ever thought of myself as someone who would choose to walk away from gymnastics.
Right.
I thought it was everything, and I would do it until the last day I could. So realizing that not only was it a part of me that would go away someday, which I thought I knew, I conceptualized, but hadn't really internalized completely. And so not only having to face that, but then having to face the idea that I was someone who was choosing to do it was like a double whammy kind of.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so I think, it's just the tough mentality is an interesting part of the athlete identity that when it comes down to it, there are definitely, I guess what I recognized was that a lot of it comes down to being more vulnerable and more open than I originally thought. And even when it comes to like mental health, what I thought I was doing or what I thought needed to be done in order to perform well was actually hindering me. So kind of being open to other people's perspectives in that way of like, no, you're not really supposed to be thinking this way, or this is actually detrimental to your performance and your well-being as a human, was super important as well. So kind of being stubborn and persistent is great in some ways, but giving a little bit in that way can definitely help. So I think, kind of that push and pull was important to realize too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to shamelessly plug a blog article I wrote for our website earlier, a few months ago. It's called "Struggle is Not Weakness," and I kind of described how vulnerability can really be our greatest strength. I think a lot of times we neglect being vulnerable, especially around people in athletics, because that macho man culture of, especially, I mean, for you too, but in male athletics, it's at a whole different level too. Like the grind, you better put in the hours, and like you said, Annie, it's stubborn and persistent is good, but to what extent is it detrimental? And I think that's kind of what we've discovered with OCD is that people will say, oh, well, you got extra reps in because you couldn't stop getting extra reps in. So you're just going to get better. But really, those aren't good reps. Those aren't, that wasn't good practice. That was anxiety-ridden practice that they didn't enjoy. So it's not, mental illness doesn't help our athletic careers. And, what has been the case with OCD especially is that because of the repetitive behaviors, people think that because you're repeating things and putting in extra work that it actually helps your performance in your athletic career, when in reality OCD doesn't help anything. Like there's nothing that OCD actually helps. And so I think it's important to remember that line that like how much time you get back when you go through after you go through treatment with OCD, that you can get quality practice in and have a social life and sleep and be a healthy human being. And I think what you brought up a very interesting point is I think that people often get caught up in pushing through, like Rachel said, and being stubborn, being persistent. And I commend you, Annie, especially for walking away from something that's so challenging. I know for me, walking away from basketball is really hard. And when you walk away on your own terms, there's always that self-doubt that you feel like you quit, right? Like, and I that is like the toughest thing to deal with and live with. And, I commend you for making that decision for your own betterment.
Thank you. Yeah. It's definitely kind of one of those big life-changing moments when you decide, oh, I can really take the reins here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's definitely something that people often won't give it up, even when it's, detrimental to their mental health. Like when their sport is actually just beating them down mentally, physically, emotionally, but it's been what they've done their whole lives. So they're like, what am I without it? I can't quit now. And I think that's when they don't look for treatment. They just look to keep pushing through.
Yeah, I think that's another kind of really powerful aspect of therapy is having someone in your life that kind of, when it's good therapy, sees you as a whole person, not just as, Tom, the basketball player, or Annie, the gymnast, because I think there's so many people in our lives who kind of, in the same way that we really kind of closely identify with certain aspects of ourselves, also kind of think, oh, but Annie, you're such a good gymnast. Like, how could you ever quit? And then it's not that they, don't want to support or don't want, the healing or betterment of a person that they're close to, but they're also just used to knowing someone as, oh, this person's an athlete. And I think one of the cool things about therapy is you're talking with someone who's fully just in your corner, kind of regardless of what it is you want to do, and who could kind of talk about, all right, but what are the other dreams you have, or what are the other identities you have, or how do we make this, sport better for you, and those type of things. And so I think that's something that's been really kind of helpful for me is as I've been figuring out kind of who I am and what I'm interested in is having someone that's just listening to kind of what I want and what I think, and not kind of used to a specific image or idea of me.
Right. Absolutely. I think, another thing is that I want to touch on also that I was thinking about when you guys were talking about is you both play individual sports too. Obviously track and field, you're part of a team, but what you're doing, your event, was very individualized. And as a gymnast, even if you're a part of Brown's team, what you do is on your own, right? And I think, how did each of you, can you touch on how being an individual athlete was different with mental health rather than being a part of a team? Even if there was a team aspect, but outside of a competition, I'm interested to see, just because I think those are two very different dynamics, and gymnasts especially, there's a lot of pressure on them constantly.
Yeah, and I'm interested, especially here, Rachel, because you played volleyball, which is more of a team sport, so you kind of have the both perspectives. Right. Yeah, but yeah, for gymnastics, it's a huge part of the sport, and definitely shaped, I think, not only my experience in it, but how I viewed myself a lot, because I thought I had to be super self-sufficient, which like I did, and it was important to learn that. But I think it also kind of perpetuated the idea that I need to be independent and I need to work through things on my own, and I shouldn't have to rely on others, which, you know, I knew wasn't true, because of course my coaches and teammates were there for me, but it does kind of just compound that idea that you're in this on your own, and your mistakes are your own, your accomplishments are your own. And though you have people to share them with you and you have someone to go to for feedback and stuff, it's kind of on you. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think too, one thing that we thought about is there's a lot of kind of differences in terms of mental health challenges for like aesthetic based sports versus combat sports versus contact sports. So track isn't quite as much of like an aesthetic sport as gymnastics, but certainly in general with those type of sports where kind of appearance matters, that you're being judged on kind of how perfect your form is, things like that. Right. There's higher rates of eating disorders versus in kind of combat or contact sports. There's higher rates of concussions and kind of injury related substance use. Right. But I think I found it a little bit in some ways easier or sort of riskier to be tempted by kind of perfectionism in an individual sport than in a team sport. I think in a team sport, I was a little bit more just, you know, playing volleyball. There's so much adrenaline going, just kind of trying to, you know, move and flow well as a team. Whereas I think with track, because it's so technical and because you really know, you know, are you jumping an inch further than last time? Right. It's kind of easy to get locked into.
It's literally like the proof is there. The you know, it's all about the number. You know.
Totally. And my coach, who is amazing at Brown, used to always say, you know, you guys have to be athletes out there. You can't be kind of machines or just trying to do technique. You have to actually just kind of release all of the sort of training in your mind when it comes to the actual competition and just sort of let it rip. Sure. Which is never a problem that I had in volleyball, because it's just, you're so in the moment. Right. But with track, I found it a little bit easier, and I was a long jumper. So a little bit easier to kind of psych myself out and not just kind of let the adrenaline take me. But
right. I think when you don't have people around you too, I mean, obviously you had your coaches but you're literally just, you know, whatever place you're in, you know, someone goes before you, you see their number, right? And then you're like, okay, I have to beat that number.
Right.
And so now you're already, you know, the anxiety is already pouring in, and you don't have, you know, your whole team behind you to kind of lean on. Obviously you have individual teammates that are doing other events and or doing the same event, or you have coaches, but it's just different when you're on the court with a bunch of teammates. Where you get anxious and they can say like, you got this. Whereas, you know, it's on you and all eyes are on you.
Right. I think long jump too is unique in that, well, with other field events, you do have multiple chances. Right. So in some ways that took a little bit of the pressure off, but I can't imagine Annie with gymnastics just kind of knowing this is it, right? I mean, I guess vault, you have multiple chances.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, it was always a relief when you got to vault because you got 2 chances. And so it was like, wow, this is a lot, like super relaxed. I could try the first one, see how it goes. You have the second chance. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of pressure. And that was just making me think of, well, there's one kind of the other aspect of Galea that we mentioned, but the performance angle. And one way I learned to deal with that pressure and kind of that individual aspect of it was seeing a sports psychologist. So learning the tools to handle kind of when you have basically 4 minutes total across all 4 events to like display what you've worked hundreds of hours on. So learning how to
pressure.
Yeah, like it's all good though. Go out and have fun. Yeah, learning how to kind of use that pressure and turn it into something positive was something that I learned kind of through visualization and different techniques that I worked with a sports psychologist or a mental performance coach. So I kind of imagine you get a little bit more of that in a team sport where you're just kind of that positive reinforcement is maybe just coming in anyway, but there are definitely ways to learn kind of how to work with that environment too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rachel, I think Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, that this is kind of something I've also learned a lot as I've thought more about the kind of sports psychology, mental performance side of things. Um, I think we tend to think of sort of mental strength as a talent, as something you either have or you don't, or like, oh,
Yeah, the
that
mental
kid,
toughness. Yeah.
Mhm.
right? Yeah, like that kid's just kind of got it. Like that kid always performs under pressure. He's a clutch player. Those type of
Right.
things. But some people it comes a bit more naturally, particularly those that might not have anxiety or other kind of factors. But it is something that can be learned too, and it's not as if there's someone that's just mentally going to be more tough than another person forever. It's something that ebbs and flows, and something people really can work on, not in a way that kind of silences the sort of mental health side of things, but in a way that lets you kind of, as Annie was saying, kind of get rid of some performance anxiety, or helps you to become that kind of clutch player that you've always wanted to be.
Yeah, I agree, and I think performance anxiety in general, I think, isn't concentrated on enough, or given enough attention, especially in athletic departments in colleges.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of universities that bring in outsourced sports psychologists to work with certain teams, but in my opinion, like, there should be a sports psychologist, not the school counseling center, a sports psychologist for each athletic department at a college and university, especially at the Division I level, just because these are high pressure stakes, things that these athletes have worked for their entire lives, and that's going to lead to performance anxiety, like, no matter what. And I think the fact that we're trending in the right direction, but there's just not enough of that. I'm interested to see if Brown had any sort of sports psychologist or support system for performance anxiety.
Yeah, so we did not. I don't know, maybe Annie, if specific teams or gymnastics had someone kind of come in, but we didn't have an in-house sports psychologist, and we didn't ever have someone kind of come talk to the track team. We did have a nutritionist that came, I think, during my senior year, but beyond that, it was kind of just the campus counseling center for sort of traditional mental health. But I totally agree with you, Tom. I think it's definitely an overlooked
And I
area.
get, budgets aren't, I've
Mhm.
4 different schools now where some budgets are great, some budgets aren't. But like, the fact is, like, you can source you can put the money together to pay a salary for somebody that's a licensed professional to help athletes out. And I think it's really a conscious effort to understand that athletes do need that. And I think, as time goes on, hopefully, as we keep bridging this conversation and pushing it, and making sure that it's known, hopefully every school kind of leans in that direction.
Totally. And that's also something too that we've been working on at Galea, is also kind of creating provider-led lecture series and offering those to colleges. So even if a university can't afford to have someone on kind of full time,
Right.
then they can kind of have a sports psychologist come in for 4 sessions and kind of teach their athletes about visualization and mental blocks and mindfulness and
That's
things
awesome
like
that
that.
you have that resource. That's great.
Yeah, so we're really excited about that. And I think something too that also shouldn't be overlooked is the role that kind of coaches can play from a sort of top-down perspective.
Definitely.
My coach at Brown would have us do mindfulness and do meditation kind of before meet days, and it was amazing, and we all
Right.
loved it. And he had the whole
Sorry, go ahead. So go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying we had the whole kind of track team meditating, which was
Right.
awesome.
That's awesome. It's interesting because we're not asking these coaches to be licensed psychologists. Like, we get it. That's not what they need to be, but they can still be support system, right?
Totally.
And even they can bridge the gap to help finding treatment for athletes too. And the more mental health resources that you two are putting out, that anxiety in athletes is outsourcing.
Mm-hmm.
The more we can post and provide to coaches, the more knowledgeable and educated they'll feel to actually be trained to at least have a conversation with an athlete about performance anxiety, or about a mental disorder, or about internal struggles that that athlete is having. Just being able to connect a little bit more, because I think, I always say the part I love about my job is that athletes are able to open up a little bit more with me because I dictate their playing time. I see them an hour, 3 or 4 times a week. And then I warm them up for practice or games, or I travel with them. But and that's when, you really build those relationships with athletes. You see them, kind of outside their sport, but it's just interesting because they're able to kind of be themselves in the weight room because their head coach isn't there and isn't dictating, especially team sports, isn't dictating their playing time or their spot on the team, or they don't feel that pressure with me. My job is to get them ready to perform and to be the best version of themselves, physically, mentally, emotionally. So when that's the process that goes on, they don't have to worry about, the pressures of playing time and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm curious, Tom, do you kind of share much about kind of your personal background or the work you do with IOCDF with your athletes, and has that facilitated a lot of conversations?
Yeah, so, I've been, at different places, and here at Wagner, it's been awesome. I've been able to kind of join into, the Hidden Opponent, this foundation that kind of I'm trying to get involved with and plug in anxiety and athletes into athletes here at Wagner and try to get people more involved. But at past schools, it hasn't been like that. And that, I had to let the athletic department know if I was posting something about mental health. There's different, I'm lucky I'm in a situation now where that's not the case. They support me and they like seeing that transparency and outgoingness, So I think, it kind of differs place to place, but I have never had a situation where me being transparent and outgoing hindered my ability to connect with athletes. And, with anybody for that matter, not just athletes. I can't remember a time where me being open and honest about my internal struggles has ever caused me to not be able to connect with somebody,
right.
I was trying to really connect with. Obviously, I went through a situation in college where I was abused by a coach when I opened up, but he didn't want to really connect. It wasn't, so I think when you look at it, I haven't ever had any trouble. I think it just encourages athletes to be able to recognize that they can be themselves when they walk in the weight room, or that, I know I'm not a licensed professional, but that I have experience dealing with my own personal struggles. So if they need to talk to somebody, someone they trust, here I am, and I can help. Help. They know that I can help them find help and treatment. So I think only positive for me has come. My biggest thing is that even if it's just one person that I'm affecting, that's one less person that has to suffer like I have, like you did, like you did. You know what I mean? It's just it's one person at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, I would also say to athletes to, one, if you feel comfortable opening up with someone, just do it right away. But two, sometimes it is helpful to kind of think about who is the best person. And through absolutely no fault of your own, your coach responded really, really poorly. And, what I found is for every kind of one person that doesn't respond empathetically, there are a whole bunch more that sort of will.
Yes,
and to kind of it's tough, but to not get too discouraged if someone doesn't kind of receive what you have to say well, because there are other people that will support you.
Absolutely.
And if you're worried about playing time, worried about maybe your coach is a total hardo, then maybe the person to talk to is the physical trainer or a teammate, or reach out to me or Annie or Tom or something like that.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree with that too, is that, I had a negative interaction with somebody when I opened up who I thought I trusted, but then I opened up to a bunch of other people that have helped me change my life and helped me get back on track. So and have, my boss here kind of took me under his wing, and, things like that, where opening up has actually helped me. So maybe that, like you said, Rachel, that one person didn't react great. And, not just great, not great. It was awful. It felt awful. But what didn't feel awful was the other 50 people that I've opened up to that support me and love me for who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
I definitely agree. I think, we're going to talk about on the next episode with Katie O'Dunn, we're going to talk about opening up to teammates and opening up to coaches and kind of understanding when to open up, who to open up to, and that
That's
type
awesome.
of thing. And I'm not saying, you shouldn't open up to anybody, like everybody. I mean, if you feel comfortable enough, that's great. It's great to be open. I mean, I think I'm at a point now where, obviously, as a lead advocate, it's all over the internet. It's all over, my social media. I'm not hiding anything anymore, because I know there are people that are still hiding things that don't want to be hiding it. And, if that means that, they reach out to me or they reach out to you two, or, people at the IOCDF, that means that they're getting help that they need.
Yeah.
So we have 4 minutes left. I kind of want to just touch a little bit on what you both are looking to do, how people can get involved at all, and any wisdom you have from past experience, or that you want to share with people listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just kind of give a brief sort of overview of kind of what we're hoping to accomplish with Galea. So the kind of first goal is basically to just have a nationwide network of therapists ranging from kind of mental health to peak performance, who really have that athlete identity. So that athletes or parents or coaches who are looking for support for themselves or for a teammate, a player, and a kid, if it's a parent, can kind of head to the Galea website and find really tailored support. So we're working hard right now to get, because clinical therapists are limited by state licensure, we're working hard to get a good network of clinical therapists in every state. But for the kind of mental performance side of things, they can work nationally. So we already have kind of a great network of those. And then the kind of longer term dream would be to really kind of start making some progress in the kind of institutional area. So having universities, leagues, players associations provide some aspect of Galea services, whether that be the provider-led lecture series or actually covering some therapy for their athletes. So that's kind of our sort of big goal. If anyone listening is kind of connected to a university, a high school that could use Galea as a resource, it would be awesome to kind of reach out to us, and we'd be excited to sort of spread the word about Galea, list it as a resource on a university or team or high school website.
I think that'd be really great for you, for Galea. I think just getting colleges and high schools on board, I think, is so huge. Because then the individual athlete might not find the website, but when a school can kind of show them that this is a safe space to seek out treatment, and doesn't have, not everybody has to know about it. I think that's so special and something that can really, really help us move forward.
Totally, because there still is some, stigma around going to see the campus counselor or talking to the sports psychologist that's hired by the team. Some people really still do want that separation, which I totally understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then just one thing to add on, or you kind of asked anything that I'd like to share about my own journey or anything like that.
Yeah.
Just one kind of thing I've learned that I wish I knew and I still like to remember now is that it's never too early or it's never too late to find support. So regardless of where you are, it's always valuable to kind of reach out. And then, I think just remembering that and that you're not alone. There's always someone out there who's wanting to support you has been very comforting for me. So something I always like to share.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Rachel?
I mean, I love that. I think that's kind of a great note to end on, but yeah, talk to someone, ask a friend how they're doing, tell them how you're doing. And yeah, just like Annie said, it's never too early or too late.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on. I've been looking forward to this, hearing more about your stories. And I know our viewers are definitely learning a lot, along the way. And I really appreciate you both taking the time every day to hop on and explain what you what you two have been up to and the important work you guys are doing. I'm excited to see us partner together and see how this keeps growing, and it's really exciting to see and promising too. I think is the best word that I would describe it as. This conversation and this the stigma, decreasing the mental health stigma in athletics. It's getting promising now. So just real quick, join the Peace of Mind virtual community at iocdf.org/peace of mind. You can view the live stream schedule and submit topics and questions for future events. All right. Be sure to check out Chris's Corner at 12 p.m. next week. If we didn't get to your question, we will get to it next time. Thank you guys both so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
We'll definitely have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah,